The Breaking of the Storm, the continuing story of the 2nd Battalion of the Essex Regiment in the Great War. On the 21st of March 1918, the Germans had launched their planned spring offensive in an attempt to knock the British and French armies apart and have a strategic effect before the American armies could be in the field. On the 28th of March, this offensive was to continue. And in the front line, the 4th Division, with the 12th Brigade, with the 2nd Battalion of the Essex Regiment actually holding the front line. So whilst it was a brigade in the lines, it was only the 2nd Battalion Essex Regiment that were in the front line. The Lancashire Fusiliers were behind them in support, and the King's Own Regiment were behind them in reserve. And so the brigade only occupied a battalion front. And this is what was going to be in the line when the Germans attack on the 28th of March 1918. The strength of the 2nd Battalion Essex Regiment being at that time 19 officers and 500 other ranks. Now, we looked at this in previous episodes, and some of this will be familiar. But there was a gap that sat between the 4th Division's flank, the northern flank, and the 56th London Division, who were the unit further to the north. This gap was about 300 yards and had been left unoccupied. The front trenches in the area had been filled in with loose barbed wire, and it was flanked by strong points and guarded by support trenches. And it was thought that this valley would form a death trap for the Germans if they penetrated at this point. Unfortunately, when the attack did come, the devastation caused by the bombardment of the strong points and the momentum of the mass of troops carried them up into this valley and essentially round the side of the troops. Now, it'll be remembered that the 2nd Battalion Essex Regiment had 3 companies in the front line and 1 in reserve on this day. A company, with Captain J.H.V. Wilmot, was on the left. C company, under Captain H.L. Hughes, was in the middle. And D company, under Captain G.B. Arnold, was on the right. There were 4 separate barrages upon the area, one falling upon the front line, one upon support, and one upon the back area. The 4th is described in the regimental history as moving at a whirl over the whole ground. This fire was augmented at 5 a.m. by the trench mortars, which cut the wire entanglements and searched the front and support lines. The advanced trenches afforded inadequate shelter from this fire because of the lack of dugouts, and the front company suffered heavy losses, but there was no real loss of ground at this point. In fact, Lieutenant Pulfer went out onto patrol into no man's land during this period with 2 other men from A company. But on his return to company headquarters, he found that Captain Wilmot, J.H.V. Wilmot, had been wounded. At 7 a.m, the fire increased in fury and intensity, and 5 minutes later the first movement was observed amongst the Germans massed in large numbers in their front line. At 7:15 a.m, line after line of the enemy advanced across no man's land, and the ground was thick with field grey uniforms. As arranged, an SOS flare was sent up from all companies, and every survivor fired rifle or Lewis gun as rapidly as he could get ammunition into the breech or drums into position, the wounded men actually helping by bringing up ammunition. 2 Lewis guns posted in Civil Avenue did excellent work until they were put out of action, and Civil Avenue is the trench that's kind of running along just underneath where A company is written on the map. The first wave, or brackets, of Germans was checked, but thousands more poured forward, working round the flanks and creeping along from shell hole to shell hole. Now, one of the soldiers in the 2nd Essex on this day was Sam Sutcliffe, and he was to write a memoir, which is a really good one, covers a lot of the war. Well, I think it's actually his son or his grandson writes it based on his account. And a lot of the information for the rest of this episode comes from Sutcliffe's book. He describes it as this: occasionally sergeants or corporals retained some sort of control of a cluster of men, but no cohesive command remained. We hoped to report to one of our subalterns to obtain some positive direction, but we found that Lieutenant X had just shot himself. We could see him sitting slumped on the ground, his back against the trench wall. Dawn proper, stand to time. So up on the far step we climb, Nestor on my right, an old man I didn't know on my left, and mist across the uneven terrain ahead. In the dawn's half light, every feature, a bush, a heap of thrown up earth, The occasional tree threatened large. Self-destroyed Lieutenant X appeared to have shrunk a bit each time his slumped figure caught my eye. What leadership, what inspiration he provided for men about to engage in face-to-face battle with an enemy superior numbers of both personnel and artillery, when with no choice but to stay put even when they fired all the ammunition. Anyway, where was our company commander? Still down below, apparently since we had not seen him around the trench. Another account from an enlisted man, another rank, also exists and is available at the Imperial War Museum, Thomas Bickerton, and he describes some events as this. We were bombarded with everything the Germans had got. At daybreak we could see the Germans advancing down the valley. We immediately let loose with what we had got. We had a system of very lights to set up immediately we were attacked, and this would call for artillery fire on no man's land. We sent up the very lights, but no artillery fire came. The artillery had been moved, and it appeared to us that we were going to be sacrificed. We sent back runners to battalion headquarters. The first 2 runners killed or taken prisoner. The third runner came back to tell us the Germans were cooking breakfast in our headquarters kitchen. Efforts of this left them mentally and physically exhausted, and wondering what the end would be, missing his platoon commander, Bickerton went into the next bay to look for him. He was sitting on the fire trench, in the corner, with a revolver in hand. I think he shot himself rather than be taken prisoner. And just to pause for a second, as far as I can make out, this is probably the same officer that Sutcliffe has talked about, because I can't make the sort of everything tally to suggest that there's 2 the subalterns, like lieutenants, who have committed suicide on this day. Returning to Bickerton's account, a corporal tied his white handkerchief to his bayonet and stuck it up over the trench. Those of us who were gunners had torn our Lewis badges off our jackets as we were afraid of what might happen to us. All arms had to be abandoned, and we were instructed to run with our hands up towards the German rear. The regimental history covers this day in quite a lot of detail, and it was to be seen as a very significant day for the battalion moving forward, as Arras Day, as it was called, the 28th of March, was often used for reunion purposes after the war. So, the regimental history. One has read of wave upon wave of German infantry advancing upon our depleted forces, when suddenly the artillery barrage lifted from our area. The relief we felt was quickly replaced by amazement of the sight of rows of huge, grey-clad men methodically taking over no man's land, the space between opposing armies' most forward positions. Their battlefield, Sutcliffe is also describing these events. Their battlefield method, obviously similar to our own, they came on in lines, each numbering about 20 to 30 men, advancing in line movement, then swinging 90% on the end. The officers in charge controlling movement by hand and whistle signals. We waited for orders. Orders from whom, anyway? We commenced firing. Thereafter, we paused only to reload our rifles, and in our midst our target appeared huge and unmissable. Our training, repetitious and at times felt unnecessary, was at last justified. We selected our targets, aimed to the tip of the foresight was level with the shoulders of the backside, and aimed low on the human target. Germans fell, each possibly victim of more than one British marksman. Since they came onward steadily, but so far not getting too close, we fired, reloaded, and fired again. Now, continuing with some of the stuff that Sutcliffe's mentioned, and merging in information from the regimental history, which is like the next passage here. They then broke through the gap of 300 yards between the Essex and the 56th Division already mentioned. The remains of the 3 companies fought on until ammunition and bombs were completely exhausted. It was this time that an endeavour was made to take Captain Wilmot to the rear above ground, owing to the enemy threatening the communications trenches. For that officer was again hit and unfortunately killed. Lieutenant Pulfer resisted until the enemy rushed to his position, and then he knew no more, for he fell unconscious with a blow on the head. The Essex, wrote a surviving officer, held on until they were surrounded, for the enemy had broken through on our flanks. Our orders were stick to our posts, which we did, until we were taken prisoners. As I watched the attack from a member of D Company says, it put me in mind of a crowd coming from a professional football match in mass formation. I particularly noticed the method of the German machine gunners. One man walked in a stooped position with a gun fastened to his back, which another rotated and fired. I'm sure this accounted for a large number of our casualties, as the bullets were skimming the top of our trenches. I have in mind too those who received head wounds, which could have only been caused by these machine guns. So returning to Sam Sutcliffe, he's repositioning with his mate Nestor, and in case it hadn't been mentioned earlier or is not clear, he's a signaller from his company. I collected several bruises, I guess, as one of two of our men seemed to resent our moving past them, and I also suffered a couple of shocks, over and above the great prevalent shock, As we shoved and pushed, I caught sight of one of our student officers wandering aimlessly out in the open. Half his face appeared to be blown off, and he must surely have been hit with bullets immediately. Then I saw a German not far away, arm raised, about to throw a stick bomb in my direction. I turned away, hoping to avoid the murderous thing, and it exploded on the parapet above me. This, I felt, was my lot, with the stinging blow to the back of my neck. I clapped my hand over the injured part and gripped hard to make sure hold my head on at all costs. I raced after Nestor, urging him to hurry to the shelter before I collapsed. Soon we were scuttling down the steps, safe in the dugout. I removed my hand. I was almost surprised that my head remained in place. There was just a little blood in my palm, and a sharp, small bomb splinter lodged in the skin of my neck. I pulled it out easily. We found our basket with the pigeons all intact. The message had to be brief. It read, I believe, as follows: "No ammunition left. Almost surrounded by the enemy. Goodbye." Now, this is from regimental history. At 7:40 a.m, enemy pressure on Chili Trench caused the battalion headquarters to be evacuated, as already stated, and the image here is Lieutenant Colonel Thompson, who was in command of the battalion on this day. The scene in the communication trench, wrote a signaller, was almost indescribable. The well-kept, neat and tidy Chili, up which we had come on the 24th, was battered all to pieces and scarcely recognisable. But we scrambled over the mountains of debris, pieces of duckboard, wire, iron stakes and earth all mixed up. Then we came across men of the battalion in support. It was here at the junction of Chili, Harry and Hussar Trench that a strong defence line existed. There's accounts saying that as Lieutenant Colonel Thompson and his headquarters party are leaving one end of the headquarters dugout, the Germans are coming in at the other. Now, the German offensive was still pressed, and the Essex men found themselves being gradually hemmed in on either flank by parties of infantry who had entered Chili Trench from Caledonian Avenue, and on the right via Calf Reserve and Chalk Reserve. Then came another German aeroplane flying low and firing a machine gun. The men clung to their position, and it was not until all ammunition was expended that the Germans were able to rush the position in Chili Communication Trench. Some 30 survivors of the front companies rallied round Captain G.B. Arnold at a dump of ammunition and bombs in the forward section of Chili Avenue, and held up the enemy until 10:30 a.m, when the ammunition was exhausted and they were completely surrounded. The Germans were but a few feet away when Captain Arnold told me to report to the colonel, and that he would hold out to the last, and I left him firing his revolver at the man who received the order. Splendid work was done by quite a number of people, said Captain Arnold. Orders were to delay the enemy. It was a very difficult job for a company commander to decide exactly when all effective delay in action had been accomplished. The enemy worked around the survivors' point of resistance in Chili Trench, and were only 15 feet away when the ammunition of defenders gave out. The trench was fairly deep, but in places the enemy were able to drop their bombs over the parapet, causing further casualties amongst the weary Essex men, who were unable to retaliate. It was obvious that nothing further could be done to delay the enemy, who had the little party of survivors completely at their mercy. Captain Arnold was full of praise for the splendid support given by the Machine Gun Corps, and this opinion was endorsed by Company Sergeant Major Hart of B Company, who stated one machine gunner was the only survivor of a team whose gun was working to the last possible round. The corporal then smashed the gun, burying one of the vital parts, and carried on to the end with a rifle. And Company Sergeant Major said the following: "This corporal deserves a VC as big as St. Paul's Cathedral." So less than a score of details comprising battalion headquarters, orderlies, police, signallers, servants, and others more usually associated with the administration of the battalion, with survivors. In all, about 35 other ranks were put into position on fire steps, whilst others were posted on the sunken road which ran from the riverside village of Fampoux towards Gravel. By that time, the barrage seemed to have passed over the road, and there was a little bit more time for reflection. And the sunken road is actually the probably about the site of a British cemetery now called Chili Trench. So, speaking of casualties, the war diary of this period lists the following casualties. Captain BCN Wilmot, who was B Company, missing, believed prisoner. Captain JHV Wilmot, MC, missing, believed killed. Lieutenant GB Arnold, MC, missing, believed killed. Lieutenant A.L. Hughes, who's listed as a captain in other sources, missing. Lieutenant Arthur Courtney Greenhill, MC, wounded. Second Lieutenant Hopwood, missing. Second Lieutenant Young, missing. Second Lieutenant Pulfer, missing. Second Lieutenant Claydon, missing, believed killed. Second Lieutenant E.A.F. Hewitt, missing. Second Lieutenant E.H.P. Singer, missing. Second Lieutenant King, missing. Second Lieutenant Patterson, missing. And 15 other ranks killed, 49 other ranks wounded, 342 other ranks missing, 1 other rank missing, believed killed, 5 other ranks wounded and missing, 1 other rank gassed, and 5 other ranks to the field ambulance. The regimental history describes it slightly different. 13 officers were killed, wounded and taken prisoner, of whom Captain JHV Wilmot MC was killed. Of other ranks, 418 were returned as casualties, of whom 342 were reported missing. Over 80 were later gazetted as killed, and of the remainder, the majority were wounded and taken prisoner. The rapid advance of the Germans having prevented their removal. However, on the screen, what you've got there is the records of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and it was initially I searched for casualties from the 2nd Battalion Essex Regiment on 28th of March, and then I spread it out just to be the Essex Regiment and looked at the areas in which they may be buried or missing. And this suggests to me that 3 officers were actually killed. Lieutenant Wilmot, MC, who we've heard quite a lot about, acting captain in charge of one of the companies. But of the others, officers that I've just listed, only Second Lieutenant Singer and Second Lieutenant King were actually confirmed as dead, and they're on the list that you can see in front of you. And then there's about 40 or so other ranks that were actually killed on that day. Some examples of the people that we're talking about there is on the left, we have Bertie Hicks, who was 21 years old and was from Prittlewell, which is in Southend-on-Sea, Essex. On the right, we've got Arthur Elias Hunt, who was only 20 years old. He was from Shoeburyness in Essex, and he was a member of D Company, and he had already been awarded the military medal. The next two, it's as you can read on the screen, Private Percy Thomas Bailey, and this is a picture that was posted into a newspaper and is now available from the Imperial War Museum. But it appears that there's no entry on the Commonwealth War Graves Commission website, so either he's not commemorated, or at the time this was posted he was missing, but he was then later to turn up as a prisoner of war. On the right hand side we have William Leslie Armstrong. He's actually listed by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission as a Lance Corporal and was from Manchester, and he's buried in Brown's Copse Cemetery, Rue. And then we have a couple of Essex men, Leonard Smith on the left hand side, who was from Chelmsford, Essex, Ted Last in the middle, and then over on the right hand side John Chowry, who's actually kind of a northerner by birth, and this is, you see, a newspaper article saying that he'd been missing and subsequently he's found to have died on that day. So by the end of the 28th of March 1918, the 2nd Battalion, the Essex Regiment, are still in their trenches. They're holding the ground that they were asked to hold, but only just. But the battalion has effectively ceased to exist, with somewhere different accounts suggest between 30 and 40 men left out of the 500 plus that had started today. But the war continues. The battalion's going to be reborn, and we'll see what happens to them in further episodes.